My name is Daryl Mendez and I'm 42 years old. The first time she showed up at my door, it was with a cracked Tupperware container and a warm smile that smelled faintly of onions and rose lotion. I thought maybe she had mistaken me for someone else, a grandson maybe, or a friend of her husband's. But no. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're too skinny to live alone. This'll help." It was some kind of meat, I think. Pork or beef, possibly chicken. It had been marinated into a brick. The outer layer flaked like old drywall. Inside it was a dry puzzle of fibers that seemed to recoil from moisture. But she smiled so earnestly, hands wringing at the edge of her sweater, that I did what I thought was polite. I smiled back, said thank you, and promised to return the container. That was 4 years ago. I didn't know then that it would be the beginning of a quiet ritual that would define my Sundays more than any sermon, ball game, or errand ever could. At the time, I had just moved into the duplex, recently divorced, newly reclusive, the kind of man who nodded at neighbors but never stopped walking. I worked remotely in IT support, a job that kept me tethered to a headset 12 hours a day, speaking to strangers I'd never meet. The silence after hours was something I both craved and feared. She was just Mrs. Langford at first. Her husband, George, waved from the garden sometimes. Retired contractor, I would later learn. Handy guy. Once helped me with a leaky faucet just because he happened to see me crouched under the sink. After that first meal, I thought the gesture might end there. A one-time kindness. But the following Sunday, another knock, another plastic container, still warm. "Nothing fancy," she'd chirp. "Just don't let it go to waste." The food was complicated. Her culinary confidence was unshakable, but her sense of flavor was somewhere between a dare and a fever dream. There were peppers where sugar should have been, cumin in the oatmeal, clumps of rice molded into suspicious sculptures. One time she made a pudding that smelled like furniture polish. I never asked what was in it, but I smiled. I thanked her. I offered idle compliments about her creativity. Her cheeks flushed every time. It was about 6 months in when George caught me outside while I was taking out the trash. He had this tired but grateful look on his face. "She thinks you love it," he said quietly. And I just wanted to say thank you. She retired and kind of lost her anchor. Used to cook for the church, big events, always had something going on. Now it's just me, and honestly, she needs someone else to care for. I must have hesitated because he added, "Cooking keeps her alive. You're giving her something I can't." From that day forward, I never flinched. I sold the lie harder than ever. Called her chef, invented backstories about how her pineapple lentil casserole reminded me of a trip to Spain. It didn't. And I started returning the containers empty and clean, sometimes with a thank you note tucked inside. I learned her name was Judith. She never insisted I call her that, never insisted on anything really. But I started using it quietly, like a prayer. "Thank you, Judith. Smells amazing." And she would nod, lips pressed tight with pride, as though she were presenting a dish to royalty. I didn't have much else going on, to be honest. I went weeks without hearing my own voice outside of work calls. No girlfriend, no real friends in town. Just me and the quiet. And then, every Sunday, Judith. One day she brought me something so spicy I actually coughed before I finished the first bite. My eyes watered. I had to take a swig of milk from the fridge like a cartoon character. But I texted her a few hours later anyway. "You ever think of bottling that sauce? You'd knock sriracha off the shelves." She responded with a heart emoji. It became a thing. She started leaving little handwritten notes with the food. "Today's sauce is a new experiment. Tell me if your tongue survives." Sometimes they had smiley faces. Once she attached a napkin embroidered with Bon Appetit. I kept everyone. There were Sundays I dreaded the food, but never her. Once she made a soup that had the color and consistency of dishwater. I gulped it down, wrote her a haiku in reply. "Your soup made me cry." In a good way, I promise spices whisper love. She taped it to her kitchen cabinet. I saw it one day when I brought the container back myself. But all good things evolve, or unravel. About a year ago, George's health started to slip. He wasn't the same in the garden anymore. No more fixing neighbors' faucets and no more quiet waves. Sometimes he didn't come out at all. Judith didn't talk about it much. She just smiled a little less. Then, last month, the meals stopped. No warning. No explanation. Just silence. At first, I thought she might have forgotten. I even opened the door Sunday evening, checked the porch like a kid waiting for a package. Nothing. Monday came. Then Tuesday. I considered texting, but I hesitated. What would I say? Hey, where's my experimental stew? It felt self-centered, even though I knew it wasn't about the food. It was the absence that hurt. The quiet that came back like a ghost. I finally saw her a week later, walking slowly back from the mailbox. Her posture was different, stooped, as if something inside her had given. I called out her name. She smiled, but not with her eyes. George had a stroke, she said. We're adjusting. I offered help, anything she needed. She shook her head gently. He's on a strict diet now. I can't cook the way I used to. Too much to think about. And just like that, the ritual was gone. That night I stood in my kitchen, staring at the empty counter where her container would have been. I realized I hadn't eaten dinner. Didn't feel like eating at all. That's when it hit me. I missed it. I missed her. Not the food, hell no, but the absurd, oddly comforting dance we'd done every week for 4 years. The way her care wrapped itself in casseroles and overcooked rice and way too much cinnamon. It was messy and misguided and beautiful in its own way. And now it was gone. The next Sunday felt wrong. Not in a dramatic way, no thunder, no heartbreak soundtrack, just wrong in that quiet, persistent way that creeps in when a ritual vanishes. I tried to distract myself, vacuumed the apartment twice, caught up on expense reports I'd ignored for weeks, even called my sister to ask about our mom's upcoming birthday. But around 5:30 p.m., the usual drop-off time, I caught myself glancing at the front window like a dog waiting for its owner. And the counter stayed empty. Around 6:15, I cracked and opened the cabinet where I'd stacked all her notes over the years. I didn't keep them out in the open. There was something embarrassingly tender about them, but I couldn't throw them away either. The stack was thicker than I remembered. Folded napkins, sticky notes, bits of torn paper. Some had doodles. Some had little drawings of what she thought her food looked like. One read, "Warning, chili surprise, may cause steam to come out of ears." I sat down on the kitchen floor holding that one. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. The thing is, I didn't cry. I didn't do anything worthy of a movie scene. I just stayed quiet. Let the absence hang there, familiar and stubborn. The next day, I made muffins. They were terrible. I'd Googled easy banana muffin recipe and still somehow managed to forget the baking powder. They came out flat and weirdly rubbery. I almost threw them away, but then I saw the old clean Tupperware container I hadn't yet returned. And I had a stupid idea. I wrapped the muffins in foil and slid them inside. Wrote a note on a napkin. You inspired me. These are humble. Be kind. Then I walked next door and left it on her porch. I rang the doorbell once. Didn't wait. Back home, I paced like an idiot. What was I even doing? Was this insulting? Patronizing? Would it make her feel worse? She didn't reply that night, or the next day. By Wednesday, I had decided I was a moron. I nearly went over to apologize, but I didn't want to make it worse. Then Friday afternoon, as I returned from a grocery run, I saw something on my doorstep. A different Tupperware container. Same brand, but not one of hers. This one had a blue lid, slightly cracked. Inside, vegetable stew. It looked normal. There was a note tucked underneath. Better than your muffins, but barely. I laughed. Out loud. Full-chested and stupid and loud. That Sunday, I knocked on her door. She opened it slowly, wearing one of those faded cardigans she always wore, her hair up in a loose bun. She looked tired. Not weak, just like someone holding a lot together with string. Hi, bye, I said. She smiled. I was wondering when you'd come talk. I figured muffins were a bold enough opening statement. She chuckled. George hated them. Said they tasted like regret. I stepped back, slightly mock-wounded. Okay, ouch. We both laughed. And for a second, it was like the months hadn't passed. Then her face grew a little more serious. He's doing better, by the way. Physical therapy, new meds. He's still cranky. I take that as a good sign. I nodded. I'm glad to hear it. She leaned against the doorway. I miss cooking. The messy kind. The kind that makes no sense to anyone but me. Well, if you ever want to poison someone again, I said, my Sundays are still free. She tilted her head. I don't want to go back to pretending. I know I'm not good at it. George always ate everything, but he was never very convincing. You were good at caring, I said. That's what mattered. Judith didn't say anything for a moment, just looked past me down the street. The wind rustled the trees, and you could hear the low hum of a leaf blower somewhere blocks away. Then she said, I still have that haiku you wrote. I figured. Thought I saw it taped to your cabinet. She smiled. I liked pretending I was someone who earned poetry. You didn't have to earn it, I said. You made it possible. A long silence, not awkward, but just waited. I could try something new, she said. Something easier, less hazardous. Judith, I said, I'll eat anything you make, even if it tries to eat me first. Her eyes sparkled just a little. Don't tempt me. That night, I cooked again. Tried to get it right this time. A simple pasta dish. Garlic, olive oil, a pinch of red pepper flakes. I portioned it into a clean container and left it on her porch with a note that read, Redemption, no muffins, swear. The container came back the next day. Empty, no note. Just a smile from her across the lawn. And just like that, the ritual began to shift. We started trading meals. Not every Sunday, not on any set schedule. Just whenever one of us had the energy. Sometimes it was soup from her, slightly less mysterious than before. Sometimes it was rice and beans from me, barely seasoned but comforting. Once she left me a little dessert, a rice pudding with cinnamon and orange zest. I texted her that it made up for the sock soup from 2019. I stand by that soup, she replied. It had character. The new rhythm wasn't as regular, but it was real, honest. One afternoon, she invited me in to help her reorganize the spice rack. George was out for a doctor's appointment, and she needed someone tall enough to reach the top shelves. Inside her kitchen was a warm museum of old gadgets, a manual egg beater, a cookie jar, shaped like a cat, faded Post-its on the fridge with phone numbers written in blue pen. That cabinet really did have my haiku laminated now. You really laminated it? I asked. She shrugged. George said it was the best review I ever got. We ended up spending 2 hours in that kitchen. Not just reorganizing, but talking. I told her about my sister's kids, the dog I almost adopted last year, the ex who used to call me too quiet. She told me about her church days, the casserole competitions she used to win, the time she accidentally entered a soup into a dessert contest and still placed third. Must have been that character, I said. Judith grinned. Exactly. That night, as I walked back to my place, she called out behind me. Daryl? I turned. Thank you, she said, for pretending, and then for not pretending. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, but inside something softened, something that had been coiled tight for a long time. The third time I cooked for Judith, I overdid the garlic. Badly. The pasta came out oily and aggressive, and I knew it the second I opened the lid. Still, I brought it over in the usual container and left it with a folded napkin that read, Forgive me. The garlic and I had a falling out. The next morning, her reply came in the form of a voicemail. I've eaten spicier apologies, she said with a raspy laugh, and worse dinners. You're still winning. That became our unspoken deal. We traded care, not perfection. A month passed in that rhythm. George was recovering slowly. She said he'd started walking around the block again with a cane and some choice curse words. The Tupperware deliveries came in waves, depending on her energy and his condition. Some weeks, nothing. Others, a stew or salad, often paired with a napkin note or a crossword clipping. One day she included an article from the local paper about community garden plots reopening. You should apply, she wrote in the margin. You've got the arms for digging. I laughed harder than I should have. I was not, by any definition, muscular, but I applied anyway, mostly to make her smile. She beamed when I told her I got a plot. You're part of the neighborhood now, she said. And I realized I already was. It was strange how easily that happened. 4 years of just existing in parallel, and then suddenly we were part of each other's routines. The way I checked my phone for her messages felt the same way I used to check dating apps, only without the nerves or expectations. Just comfort. But of course, life doesn't care about comfort. One Thursday afternoon, I got a text from George. Yes, George. Daryl, it's George Langford. Judith is in the hospital, fell in the kitchen, nothing broken, but they're keeping her overnight. She asked me to let you know. I stared at the message like it wasn't real. I had never even given George my number, I replied quickly. Asked which hospital, if she was okay, if he needed anything. She's fine, just bruised, more scared than hurt. I offered to drive over. He said she was already sleeping. That night, I sat on my porch for hours. The silence didn't feel nostalgic this time. It felt like a warning, like something was changing, and I didn't know what it would look like on the other side. The next morning, I brought a thermos of homemade chicken broth to the hospital. George met me in the lobby. He looked older than I remembered. Not in a frail way, but in a 3 hours of sleep on a chair way. His shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes had that glazed-over shine of someone barely holding it together. She's okay, he said. Wants to go home already. He held the elevator door open for me, and we rode up in silence. He didn't say much until we were outside her room. She talks about you more than you think, he said. Calls you her Sunday salvation. I didn't know how to respond to that. Inside, Judith was propped up in bed, an IV in her arm, and a TV playing quietly above her head. Her hair was flat against her head, and her usual cardigan had been swapped for a thin hospital gown. But her eyes lit up when she saw me. You brought soup, she said, grinning. Of course you did. I held up the thermos like a peace offering. She waved it off. George already brought me some watery nonsense. Hospital approved. I poured a bit into a paper cup and offered it. She sipped, winced slightly. You overdid the salt, she said, but it's still better than their version. We talked for a while, about nothing mostly. Her nurse, the fluorescent lights, George's terrible jokes. I stayed until they came to check her vitals, then said I'd come back the next day. As I turned to leave, she said, You're the only neighbor who didn't make me feel like I disappeared. I didn't look back. I just nodded and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what George said. Sunday salvation. It was a joke at first, right? Me pretending to love bad food. Her pretending I wasn't pretending. But somewhere along the way, the pretending turned into something real. 2 days later, they sent her home. I helped George bring her inside. She was more tired than usual, but tried to act like everything was normal. I'm going to start cooking again, she said, lowering herself carefully into her recliner. Nothing fancy, just something warm. You don't have to, I said. I know, she replied. That's why I want to. I left her house with an empty container and a heart that felt strangely full and heavy at the same time. Then, a week later, it stopped again. No explanation, no meal, no note. At first, I assumed she needed rest. Then maybe she was out of ingredients. But when Sunday passed without a word, and Monday did too, I finally walked. Over and knocked. George answered. He didn't smile. She's been tired, he said. More than usual. Is she okay? He hesitated. She's resting. Hospice started coming by. It hit like a wave. Slow, then sudden. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know. Neither did we, he said softly. Until recently. I looked past him into the hallway, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. I couldn't. Can I see her? He nodded slowly. She's sleeping now, but come by tomorrow. Mornings are better. That night, I opened every single note she'd ever written me, laid them out on my table like puzzle pieces. The napkins, the sticky notes, the folded clippings. the ones that smelled faintly of her lotion. I read each one like it was scripture. Then I found the haiku. Your soup made me cry. In a good way, I promise. Spices whisper love. I laminated it. The next morning, I baked. Banana muffins, this time with baking powder. Just like that first attempt. It felt fitting. I brought them in a clean container, wrapped in a napkin, embroidered with flowers. I included a note that said simply, "You saved my Sundays." When I arrived, George let me in quietly. Judith was awake, but clearly weak. Her eyes fluttered open when she saw me. I thought I smelled banana, she said. You did. Hopefully not regret this time. She smiled. We'll see. I sat with her for an hour, told her about the community garden, the tomatoes that weren't sprouting, the neighbor whose dog kept digging under my fence. She nodded through it all, said very little. But when I stood to leave, she reached out and squeezed my hand. Promise me something, she whispered. Anything. Keep cooking, even badly, for someone. I nodded. I'm serious, she said. Care looks like effort, even the burnt kind. I promised. And then I went home unsure if I'd ever hear her voice again. She passed on a Wednesday. No dramatic ending, no final meal. Just a call from George at 7:04 a.m. His voice was quiet, like it had been rehearsing all night. She went in her sleep, he said. Didn't suffer, just stopped. I don't remember exactly what I said. I think I offered to come over. Maybe I said I was sorry. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on the edge of my bathtub just to breathe. The funeral was small, held that Saturday in a chapel so old the pews creaked when you blinked. Her church friends came. A few neighbors. George sat in the front row, holding a handkerchief folded so tight it looked like a scrap of bone. I brought muffins. I didn't know what else to do. Banana walnut. Baked that morning, tucked into a small paper box and left on the table next to a framed photo of her in her church kitchen. Flour on her apron. Face scrunched in concentration over a mixing bowl. It was the only photo that made me cry. George spotted the box, opened it, took a muffin out and broke off a piece. She'd call this overmixed, he said. I call it honest, I replied. He laughed, or something like it, a short breath that trembled near his ribs. I wanted to ask you something, he said after the service as people trickled out into the parking lot, voices soft like rain. Of course. She left some things behind, he said. Recipe clippings, her kitchen journals, that kind of stuff. I think she wanted you to have them. I blinked. She said that? She didn't have to. That afternoon, I went back to their house. The rooms felt smaller without her voice in them. George moved slower, but he moved like someone who was still living, which somehow made it worse. He led me to the back of the kitchen. There was a drawer I'd never noticed before, tucked beneath the spice cabinet. Inside, notebooks, faded clippings, dozens of loose pages with recipe experiments, notes to herself, and even a few lists of Daryl-safe ingredients written in careful loops. She kept track? I asked. Religiously, George said. You were her test kitchen, but also her Sunday. There was one entry in a little blue journal that stopped me cold. The handwriting was slanted, quick, but legible. March 8th. He called the soup bold. Didn't even flinch. I think he knows I'm winging it now, but he smiles anyway. Maybe pretending is just another form of kindness. I read it twice, then 3 times. George tapped the notebook gently. You were good to her. She saved me, I said. He nodded. She did that. Quietly, for a lot of people. I went home and didn't sleep. The next morning, I cleaned my kitchen from top to bottom, scrubbed everything, bought new cutting boards, rearranged the spice rack. It felt ritualistic, almost religious. And then I started cooking, not to replace her. That would have been impossible. But to remember her. I began posting once a week to a quiet cooking blog I'd left dormant for years. It had maybe 6 followers, but I didn't care. I called the new entries Sunday Lessons, and every post began with a memory and ended with a recipe. Some borrowed from Judith, some inspired by her absurd flavor risks. The first entry was titled, The muffin that redeemed me. I added a photo of her haiku, laminated and propped beside a half-eaten muffin. A week later, I got an email from a woman in Tennessee. My grandmother cooked like this? I'd forgotten how it felt to be loved through food until I read your post. Thank you. I kept posting. George and I started meeting at the garden plot once a week. He couldn't dig much, but he brought iced tea and made fun of my crooked tomato cages. We didn't talk about Judith much, but her name hung between us like the scent of something warm in another room. One Sunday, I dropped a container of homemade chili at his door. Inside, I'd tucked a napkin note that said, "Judith warned me this recipe bites back." He didn't reply in words, just left the container on my porch the next day with a clean spoon and a chocolate chip cookie on top. The cookie was awful, burnt and gritty, but I ate it all the same. Months passed. Seasons changed. The blog gained traction. A few local folks reached out to ask if I'd consider doing a Sunday cooking class at the community center. I said yes, even though the idea terrified me. The first class had 7 people. I taught them how to make banana muffins, the good kind. At the end of the session, I handed out Judith's original recipe clippings, photocopied and bound with string. One woman clutched hers to her chest like it was a family heirloom. That night, I walked home alone. The air smelled like rain and rosemary, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel empty. 6 months later, the garden was wild in the best way. Ferns curling over raised beds, tomatoes stubbornly growing sideways, and basil stretching towards sunlight like it remembered Judith's hands. I kept her spice notebook in my kitchen drawer. The cover had a faint cinnamon stain, and the pages smelled faintly like cumin and old ink. I still cooked from it, sometimes literally, sometimes in spirit. Her notes weren't always legible, and many of them were riddled with arrows and doodles, but they were hers. One Sunday, I taught a class called Comfort Cooking Without Apologies. I opened by reading one of her notes aloud. If people smile after the first bite, don't ask questions. Just say you meant to do it that way. They laughed. But I wasn't joking. After class, a woman in her 50s stayed behind. She looked nervous, like she was holding something heavy. "That thing you said about care looking like effort," she said. "That got me." I nodded. "It got me too. Still does." She handed me a recipe card. This was my mom's. She passed last year. I haven't had the courage to cook it again, but maybe someone should. The card was yellowed, the ink fading. I took it with both hands. "I'll try it next Sunday," I said. Walking home that night, I passed by George's house. The porch light was on. The roses she used to trim still leaned gently against the railing. There was something on my own porch, a container. Not hers, just a cheap foil one from the grocery store, but inside was lasagna. A little overcooked, a little too much cheese. The note said, "Made with love, not judgment." It wasn't signed, but I knew. I reheated it, ate it standing over the sink, letting the warmth chase away a sudden sharp cold that had crept up from memory. Somewhere in the folds of that lasagna, between the slippery noodles and uneven layers, I tasted something I hadn't felt in months. The weird, clumsy warmth of being cared for. That night, I printed a photo of Judith, the one from the chapel, flower on her face, and pinned it to the inside of my cabinet door. Next to it, I taped a quote. "Care looks like effort, even the burnt kind." It stayed there, quiet, present. Not long after, I started hosting Sunday suppers at the community center. Open-table potlucks where anyone could bring food or stories or just show up with an appetite. Some came with casseroles, some with takeout. No one judged. Everyone ate. At one dinner, a teenage girl brought a tray of neon orange cookies. Everyone hesitated. She grinned nervously and said, "My grandma helped me. She's 90 and can't taste sugar anymore." We all ate 2, maybe 3. And I thought of Judith. The first time she handed me food, I had assumed she was giving me something. But I was wrong. She was sharing something, with risk, with hope. She was offering presents. Now every Sunday I tried to do the same. Quietly, earnestly, without perfection. A few months later, George moved in with his daughter upstate. Before he left, he handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a note in Judith's handwriting, dated the week before her fall. "If he keeps pretending to enjoy my food, give him this. my blessing to stop pretending and to start cooking. She'd signed it with a heart and one final P.S. Also, tell him the lasagna was supposed to taste like that. I smiled, folded the note, and put it inside my recipe journal right where the haiku lived. I still miss her, not just her food or her humor or her notes on weirdly overconfident spice blends, but the way she understood something most people overlook. That care, real care, shows up in odd, imperfect packages. That connection doesn't need polish, it just needs presence. And now, every time I see someone take a hesitant first bite of something unfamiliar, then smile anyway, I think of her. I don't grieve the world's worst lasagna anymore. I honor it. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life confessions and emotional journeys like this one.